All right. Hello and welcome to MS202 Lesson 03 on Creative Thinking. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS at the University of Montana, and I am going to be leading you through this long but very important lesson today. So to start off with, let's talk a little bit about creative thinking. Now, we know that we have critical thinking, which you should have learned in 102 if you went through that class. If you don't remember that or you didn't attend a 102 class in ROTC, I do recommend that you go back into this channel, find the critical thinking class, that screencast, and just watch that video. It'll give you a lot of kind of basic information that builds up into more creative thinking. But there's two very different styles there, right? Critical is really assessing and we're very facts and data driven, whereas creative thinking kind of entails all of these different ideas that are on your screen. So we've got all these different facets, right? We've got your creative brain. We've got this idea of implementing ideas. We've got barriers and myths. We've got our thinking tools. We've got creative problem solving, this creative process in general. So when we're talking about creative thinking, I really want you to just keep in mind the idea of innovation or out-of-the-box thinking, out-of-the-box ideas, styles, ways to fix problems or find solutions to problems. That's really going to be the basis of this entire class. So I want you to think about this. Why is the idea of originality important when we're developing solutions? Or another way to ask that, why do we want innovative ideas or out-of-the-box ideas when we're coming up with solutions? Well, because being able to be original is that bridge over a knowledge gap that might otherwise not even exist, or maybe not even be presently known at the point of need. So originality will bring in some of these ideas that we hadn't thought of. We didn't even know existed. We didn't know even were a possibility. Now, originality and original solutions might not always be the correct solutions, but we do want to really focus on our way and our process of coming up with original ideas. Now, on that same note, do some self-reflection here, have you yourself ever made a decision based on initial information before thinking or brainstorming what the outcomes could possibly be? Now, if you're not nodding or raising your hand or thinking, yep, that's me, you're probably not being honest with yourself. I think every single one of us, even maybe on a daily basis, a weekly basis, we tend to, human nature, jump to making decisions based on the first information that we get. We don't necessarily think through or brainstorm what the outcomes of that thought or of that decision could be. And that's where being a little bit more creative really makes us think about those outcomes, those consequences, if you will. So next, we're going to do a quick video. This clip is from the movie The Martian, if you haven't seen it. If that's your style or your genre, I think it's pretty good. In this story, astronaut and botanist Mark Watney, he was a crew member of Ares 3, which was a manned mission to Mars. Unfortunately, though, he was lost in a storm while they were trying to do an emergency evacuation. While he was alone and unafraid in the Red Planet, he used his scientific knowledge and creative instincts just to stay alive, just to do his thing. This next clip that you're going to watch shows where he actually punctured his spacesuit to release air pressure to launch himself off his pod and to move closer to his rescue team. Think of it kind of like using a balloon, like when you pop a balloon or you release the valve on a balloon and it goes all over the place. That's kind of what you're about to see here.
Mark, report.
On my way, Commander.
Johansson, what's my relative velocity to Mark?
5.2 meters per second.
Copy. Just in course.
3.1 meters per second. Distance to target 24 meters. 11 meters to target. 6 meters.
I got it. I got it.
Way to go, Iron Man.
All right, so now that you saw that and kind of saw that creative solution to a major problem, let's be honest for a second. Is that realistic? Is that something that could actually happen? I'm not a scientist, so I can't actually answer that question, but I'm going to lean towards likely not. I don't see that happening anytime soon of just going out into space, puncturing the hand of your spacesuit and using it as some sort of jet propeller. But it really does illustrate that idea of some sort of very out of the box creative solution to a major problem, right? That ultimately worked out in their favor. So when we're watching this, what did you think of that clip? Were you thinking, whoa, that's a crazy way to do it? Are you so inundated with creative ideas in cinema that it just seemed normal to you, or you didn't really catch that it was such an out of the box idea? Or were you like me and the way that I watch videos and going, that would never happen? Where did you lean when watching this? And then when you think about what happened and what you were actually watching in this, would you define Mark Watney as having exercised creative thinking in the solution that he developed? Why or why not? Now, I think in all reality, we can lean towards that. Yeah, absolutely. It was creative thinking, right? It was an out of the box, something that probably most people wouldn't have thought of or wouldn't have even considered trying. But when you're kind of in a life or death situation, and if you don't do it, you're going to die. If you do it, you have a chance. I guess that's the way that you're going to roll with it. So let's talk our learning objectives. Today, through this course, you are going to be able to define the difference between critical thinking and creative thinking, like we talked about at the beginning. We're going to go back and we're going to recall the 8 elements of thought, as well as the 8 essential intellectual traits, which again, if you've been through that 102 critical thinking class, you may have this memory jogged a little bit. If not, maybe pause this, open up that video, watch that, so it'll make a little more sense as we talk through them. And then we're going to identify some tools and techniques that actually foster this idea of creative thinking. So, what do you consider to be a critical thinker? Let's start there. What words would you use to describe a critical thinker? And if you want, you can pause this video right here. Hopefully you already have a Word doc up because you've watched enough of my videos, or a piece of paper and a pen out that you're taking notes. But if you just want to sit and think on this for a moment, either way, just pause and come up with some words that you would use to describe what you see as being a critical thinker. Now, we have 2 different things, right? We have the critical thinking side and we have our creative thinking. They do 2 very different things for us. Critical thinking is very clear to the purpose at hand and our questions, like the actual questions that we're talking about. In critical thinking, we want to be clear, accurate, and very relevant in both our writing and our reading. And this idea of critical thinking goes deep beneath the surface. It's logical and fair, and we want to apply these skills in all areas. Now, on the other hand, creative thinking involves that creative side of our brain, right? We want to come up with something new, some original ideas. It requires having an actual passion for creating those new ideas. You don't want to be creative because you're forced to. You want to actually have a passion for coming up with something new. And then it forces us as leaders just to trust our instincts when we're using that creative part of our brain. So another way to look at it here is we have thinking, right? This thought, the idea of thought. And if we're going to the left, that's more of your critical thinking, where you're critically assessing the situation or the question or the problem. But if we go to the right, creativity is originated there. So we can go one way or the other, where we can critically assess the problem itself, and then we can go into some creativity of solving that problem. So they do work hand in hand, but they're 2 very different things. So with that, why is it important to actually know the characteristics of critical thinkers? Well, it provides you a baseline so that you as the leader can actually determine if your own soldiers and peers are exercising the elements of critical thinking. And then why is it important to understand the art of creative thinking? Well, when we understand the actual art, you're able to originate new ideas to further improve your decisions and the quality of life for your soldiers. Let me tell you some of the best decisions that have been made, or the best things that have been implemented, the best policies that I've seen that truly impact the most people are derived from being creative. Coming up with out-of-the-box solutions can truly help and improve the quality of life for your soldiers, which is such an important aspect of being a good leader. Now, here's your 8 elements of thought. As a review, we have all of these different elements of thought, right? We have our concepts, we have that actual question at issue, we have our purpose, information, assumptions, points of view, our own interpretations and inferences, and we have our implications and consequences of those thoughts. So these are the 8 things that go into the idea of a thought there in the center. Another way to look at it is that element on the left there is going to answer the question on the right. So when we're talking about our purpose, we want to be able to ask ourselves, what's the goal or objective? Is it realistic to achieve? Now keep in mind, all of this is part of critical thinking, right? We're being relevant, we are being clear, concise, to the point. Our assumptions, are your assumptions justifiable? We all have them, right? Moving down to concepts, are your own concepts precise or clear? Implications and consequences. What are the impacts or consequences of your thought or of your decision? And then when we're talking about fairness, is what we're thinking, or all of the solutions that we're trying to come up with, does it account for the views of others? And we'll talk about that just a little bit more, why it's so important to bring outside views into our thinking. But this is just that quick review of the 8 elements of thought. So in your opinion, or in your thoughts looking at those, what are the most important elements of thought and why? Is it assumptions? Is it the question at issue? Is it the implications or consequences? There's no right or wrong answer. Just curious if anybody actually believes that there are important elements of thought, or if there's anybody that thinks that all of them are just as important. Does it depend on the context or the scenario or the problem that we're trying to solve? Now, what types of techniques do you personally use to solve problems, resolve issues, or answer questions? Are you the one that likes to write everything out? Are you the one that likes to ask other people for their opinions? What types of techniques do you implement into your daily life when you're trying to solve problems? Another thing I want you to think about is, how often do you actually listen to other points of view but ultimately do not consider them? Now, this can be a tough question to actually reflect on. Like, a lot of us can say, oh yeah, I listened to several different points of view, but I ultimately don't actually consider them in my final decision. Are you doing it just to show that you're open to other thoughts? Or are you taking that next step and actually considering those opinions and those perspectives in a way that may alter your final decision? Now, 8 more things, right, are essential intellectual traits. These are the different attributes or traits of somebody who is showing true, just intellectual skill, right, when it comes to the thought process. So once again, we have 8 of them, right? We've got our humility, we've got our intellectual autonomy, perseverance, intellectual integrity, empathy is such a big one. If you were to ask me if there's a certain one that's most important, I would say empathy is at least in the top half of all of these, in my opinion. Intellectual courage, fair-mindedness, confidence, and reason, all of these play an important role in showing whether or not we're good critical thinkers. And again, I want you to focus on, right now we're still talking about critical thinking. This is all a review of your critical thinking class. So how can we, and I say we, general we, but we as people, we as an organization, we as individuals, how can we keep our minds open to view other perspectives in an unbiased and unprejudiced way? How can we actually keep our minds open to those other perspectives that we maybe don't agree with, or we don't understand, or the ideas themselves are something that we've never thought of or never lived through. And that's when we're talking about that fair-mindedness. Now, in talking about intellectual courage, when have you personally shown, think about a time, when you've shown intellectual courage on beliefs or opinions that you feel very strongly about? And what happened? What happened when you showed that courage, or you stood up on something that you felt very strongly about? What was the circumstance? What was the context? What was the area, or how did the situation or opinion even come up? The next thing, why do you think intellectual integrity is so important? Now, we already know that integrity itself, right? That's one of the Army values. So of course, integrity is important, but what does it mean to have intellectual integrity? This is what it is right here. It allows you to hold yourself to the same standard as you do in others. And intellectual integrity keeps our views and our contradictions consistent. So when we are expecting people to think problems through and listen to other viewpoints, we also hold ourselves to that same standard. It's very much as I do as I do. Do as I say and do what I do. Walk the talk. And when we're talking confidence and reason, how does that even play a part in helping us make better decisions? Well, that specific portion of this, that specific trait, means using standards of reasonability as the fundamental criteria that we judge whether to accept or reject any belief or position of others. Now, that's a lot of verbiage thrown at you. Basically just using these are reasonable answers, these are reasonable beliefs, and using that as your foundation for which to judge whether or not something else should be accepted or rejected by other people. So, what is the most important intellectual trait? Is it autonomy, confidence and reason, intellectual integrity? What is the most important to you and why? And then I want you to think about what might not be the most important, or something that you didn't quite think about. And do a little bit of self-reflection on how do we make that more important to us. That's your fun little assignment for after this class. All right, so now let's get into creative thinking. You have had a nice quick review on critical thinking. Let's get into the fun stuff, right? So we have different techniques, 4 different types of techniques, right? For fostering this idea, for getting in the right mindset or having it actually happen. So we have there on the top left, we've got brainstorming, researching, and mind mapping. I'm sure you've heard those buzzwords before. We all know what brainstorming and researching are. Maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, for mind mapping, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. We also have this idea of meta questioning or meta questioning. And that's really just kind of, I like to call it the 5 W's, but getting into, and not the 5 W's of who, what, when, why, where, I'm sorry. I like to call it the 5 whys, getting into deeper questioning, like this happened. Okay, why did this happen? Well, because I felt like this. Okay, why did you feel like this when that happened? It's just kind of getting a little bit deeper, trying to find that root cause or root question. Then we talk into questioning of assumptions. That's a 3rd technique there. And we have our 4th technique, the 4 ways of seeing. And that's going to really dive into looking at things from multiple perspectives. So when we're talking that first brainstorming, researching, and mind mapping, this is developing initial ideas for further research, right? So you're all sitting at a table, or you yourself are just brainstorming different ways to look into this. It helps the team understand just different identified variables, and it can depict the relationships of relevant variables. So how do they all connect to each other? That's where all 3 of those different things, brainstorming, researching, mind mapping, kind of work together when we're talking about creative thinking. And like I said about meta questioning, it really helps us get to a more complete understanding of a topic just by asking higher order questions. And I'll give you some ideas of what higher order questions could be. But like I said, I like to say the 5 W's, 5 whys, whatever you want to call it, just getting to the crux, like getting to the deeper, the under layers of an onion, like getting a little bit more in there, not just your simple yes, no questions. Now, when it comes to our assumptions there and questioning those assumptions, we know that assumption is like a supposition or a presupposition on either the current situation or future courses of events. And then like I said, the 4 ways of seeing, that's taking, let's say, like a planning team, where you'll examine the situation from several different perspectives, typically from other people that are involved or that are within the area or that are going to be impacted by maybe a particular decision that's trying to be made. So I want you to think about this here. When was the last time you were actually in a brainstorming session? What was the situation and what were the results? Was it helpful? Was it too many ideas thrown out at once? Did you tend to get off track? Were you alone or were you with a team that was brainstorming? Think about that for just a moment. And I do want you to truly think about, was it helpful or was it hurtful to the situation? So I can tell you, in my experience, brainstorming sessions can definitely go left or right. They can either be super on task and we all come out of there with a great few ideas to go forward. They can also be 2 hours of seemingly wasted time because we get on too many tangents and there's no real direction or purpose for the session. Now, like I said, what are some examples of higher order questions, right? That meta questioning. Some might be, why did it happen? Why was it true in your eyes? How does this event relate to other events? Either relation to impacting them, or does it relate to other events you've already dealt with that you can bring some solution-based ideas into? Why was this not considered? Why was this idea not considered? Tell me more about why we threw that off the table. Are there any other solution possibilities? So those are all examples. Those are not the only higher order questions you should be asking. That's just an example of how to get a little bit deeper and get more creative in your solution-based. Now, what are the results of making good and reliable assumptions? Now, we always tend to think of assumptions being bad, right? We see it as a negative context, right? What does it mean to assume? You make an ass out of you and me, right? Not all assumptions are bad. It's okay to have good and reliable assumptions about things. In fact, sometimes we just don't have all of the facts and we have to make assumptions. So we know that good assumptions support effective decision-making and problem solving. However, if our assumptions are either unsupportable or they're based on faulty reasoning, like some of those fallacies that we've talked about, they can result in poor decision-making and problem solving. So it's important to be able to delineate good from bad assumptions and assumptions that do have some sort of reasonable basis, right? Or some sort of factual reasons for assuming those things. So as we start to wrap up with this, what I always want you to think about is I don't want you to ever think that you've just wasted 20 some minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes with me watching this video on YouTube. It's never a waste of time, right? Developing yourself is never a waste of time. So after every one of these classes, I want you to ask yourself, how might you use it in the future as an Army officer? Hopefully you'll use it something like this, because when it comes to creative thinking, it is absolutely crucial to be able to think things through effectively when providing guidance to your soldiers in unit. Making off-the-fly decisions has to happen sometimes. It really does. Sometimes you don't have time to work through an entire process to get to a good decision. In fact, a lot of times in ROTC, when you're in things like lab or FTXs, you have to make a quick decision based on very little information, right? And we want to see that decision-making process happening quickly. But when it comes to creative thinking, when you have the time, it is absolutely crucial to be effective with thinking things through in order to come up with the absolute best decisions. Because your soldiers, your unit, your soldiers' families, your peers, your superiors, they're all going to be relying on you at times to make good, solid, reasonable decisions or come up with reasonable solutions to problems. This is how that class can help you. Now, kind of thinking a little bit deeper, how does the idea of creative thinking actually help us achieve both individual, right, for ourselves, and organizational, for the Army, success? Well, as an Army officer, All of these skills that you're learning will allow you to improve your abilities to analyze, disseminate, and apply information to your soldiers, peers, and superiors. So just kind of a different way of saying what I said on the last slide of use this. Don't see this as a waste of your time. It's not a waste of your time. It is not a waste of my time. It's not a waste of your ROTC instructor's time who told you to watch this. When you're going to spend the time to do this, take something from it. And from this one, I want you to take that all of these skills will make you a better leader. I promise you. Learning these and then learning how to apply them will make you better tomorrow than you were today. Now, if you have a piece of paper out or you have a Word doc up, take a few minutes and I want you to kind of think about this question. So I really want you to think about the future here, right? How does all of this information reinforce the Army's focus of developing the leadership for tomorrow's Army? Now, you watching this video right now are likely part of tomorrow's Army, right? Maybe you're 2 years away, 3 years away. Maybe you're brand new and you're being super awesome and you're coming back to what you learned at ROTC. How does it support you as a future Army officer? Because it does, like it does support you, but how? You are my children's future leader. And that's important to me. It's important to me that you're not just clicking through this, putting it on 2.0 speed. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. I watched this video. I'm good to go. There is a reason that we teach this. There's a reason that creative and critical thinking are so important. I've said in the critical thinking video, it may be arguably, in my opinion, one of the most important. Creative thinking is right up there with it. It is important to me that you someday be the leader for my kids, coming up with good, solid, reliable decisions when you're in charge of their life. Not to get corny on you, but someday my daughter or my sons may be in your formation. And have you taken the time to dive into these lessons and make yourself a better future Army officer? So pause this video, if you will. Take some time to either think about it, write it out, type it out. I mean, it's kind of widely known in the academic world that if you actually take the time to type, even better, write out your answers, they stick with you longer. But pause here, take a look at this, dive in a little bit more and do some self-reflection. All right, so in closing, we define the difference between critical thinking and creative thinking. We also talked the 8 elements of thought and the 8 essential intellectual traits. Again, I highly recommend you head back and watch that MS102 lesson on critical thinking. That would be lesson 06. And then we also identified some of those tools and techniques that just help foster creative thinking. Now it's on you to go forward and use some of those techniques, practice a little bit with them, see what works for you and your team, see what doesn't, see what kind of speaks better to your creative brain, and make yourself better. With all of that, as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to your own Army ROTC instructor first, maybe an MS4 or high-speed MS3. If you still can't get your questions answered, feel free to reach out to me at silver.beatty@mso.umt.edu, and I will do my best to get you into the right direction. Thank you.